I guess it was a couple weeks ago. Has it been 2 weeks? It's been 3 weeks. 3 weeks since I've been up here. Man, time flies when we're having fun. Anyway, so I'm looking through my notes to see where I left off at. And so I'll tell you this. So you know where we left off. I'm just going to do a quick summary. But we were talking about, some of the things we were talking about was about spiritual paralysis and spiritual plateaus. We talked about that. But we also talked about whose voice are we listening to? Right? Do you remember that game show? Sandi knows that game show. The one where whose line is it anyway, right?
So, yeah, because we're going to do some of this stuff for youth that's going to happen in a week or so.
Yeah, so whose line is it in? Or, did you ever watch that game show, right? Or not really a game show, but they'd get these actors that would get up there and they would ad-lib. They'd say, okay, here's your line and go with it. And it was hilarious. It was really a lot of fun. And but whose voice are we listening to anyway, right? We were talking about discerning the right voice. Because we can hear the voice of God that's coming from the sacred realm, right? From the Holy of Holies. And He can speak to our hearts and we can listen to His voice and He can set things straight. Because how many times have I said this? That just one word from God will change everything in our lives, right? Just one word. That's all we need to hear. And I told you about my testimony last time about how in the middle of the night I had been feeling the pressure of all these things going on. If when your income has just been cut in half, and if you don't know, basically, I was told the other day that my line of work as an adjuster dealing with vehicles, dealing with cars, that type of stuff, is that I'm a dinosaur. That we are going extinct. Why? Because the industry is changing. So when the industry changes, what do? Well, you don't hang on to that or you'll go extinct. Right? So I was praying through and I was praying all these different things. Mainly is because the cloud, the pressure, the finances, the bills, and all that stuff that goes along with it was weighing so heavily that I couldn't hear the voice of God. Because have you ever been in that situation? You feel the pressure so much that all you need to do is get a glimpse of His face. Yes. And when you get a glimpse of His face, nothing else matters. But when it's so heavy and the fog is so thick around you, what do you see? Nothing but the pressure. Nothing but that which is in your face. And ultimately, I was praying for the wrong thing because it was in the fourth watch. You know what the fourth watch is? It's that time between 3 and 6 a.m. that the Father will wake you up and speak to you. Sometimes you feel like you're dreaming, but the dream is so real that when you wake up, you feel like that message in that dream was for you. And that's Father speaking to you. It's not a pizza dream, right? And I'm going to say this because we eat clean. But if you put the pepperoni on your pizza, maybe it is a pizza dream. It'll mess with your mind. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about when the Father speaks. Yeah. Okay. Turkey pepperoni is pretty good, though. But when He speaks, and He spoke to my heart that in the wee hours of the morning, and this is what He said. It wasn't about the pressures, but He spoke to my heart and He said, He said that I was not a failure. I felt the pressures of the finances, but He told me I wasn't a failure. And then what I spoke about last time is that we cannot allow our circumstances to define us. And that was the message that He spoke to me in the wee hours of the morning. Because whose voice was I listening to? The voice that says, hey, you're just not doing enough. You need to work harder. You need to do this. You need to do that. You need to put these pieces to, it's your fault that it's not happening. And I was listening to the wrong voice. What was I listening to? The demonic influence, the demonic voices. And we talked about this last time, how we will, where some people will tell us that a believer is immune to the oppression of the enemy. How many know that that's a falsehood? That's a myth, right? Because when you're in the middle of those circumstances, the oppression of the enemy is a real thing. You're under demonic influence. I was under demonic influence as a believer. Because if the enemy can take us out as believers, because we're a threat, to the kingdom,
That's right.
to the kingdom of darkness, then he's done his job. He's removed the threat to his kingdom.
Right.
Well, I don't want to be there. I don't want to be under that influence. I don't drive under that influence anymore. Okay? No, but seriously, we are told in 1 John 4:1 that we do not believe every spirit, but test the spirits to see whether they're from God, from Yah. Because many false prophets have gone into the world. I mean, how many times do we find that our senses are dulled because of circumstances?
That's right.
If I'm feeling all of that pressure, I'm in a fog. I'm not seeing well. My senses, you have 5 senses. Some say that we have like maybe 8 or 9 sensors. There's like multiple dimensions that we don't even know. We have not even defined in terms of the senses that God have given, or 9 sensors. There's like multiple dimensions that we don't even know. We have not even defined in terms of the senses that God has given us. But if none of them are working properly, we can't see, we can't hear, we're not sensing his presence, then something's wrong. And we got to deal with that, right?
Or you gotta get filled.
That's right. So there's something that we have to do. We've got to break through to, because Hasatan wants to sit there. Satan, right? He's the enemy of our soul. He's ready to come in and to oppress. And by the way, it's interesting because I was looking at Pal Talk because it tells me who comes in the room and comes out of the room. Tarot card comes into our room every week.
Wow.
What's tarot card doing?
Witchcraft.
Hanging out, trying to check us out, see what's going on at Life of Worship. Why? Because the enemy wants, isn't it interesting? The enemy wants to find out what's going on.
Right.
We're going to talk about how the enemy works, but how we spoil the works of the enemy today. What is the strategies of Hasatan, but how do we spoil those strategies? We're going to get into that a little bit. But here's something that we talked about before, that we talked about in the second heaven. We can look up in the sky, that's the first heaven. The second heaven is where the enemy dwells, right? It's that demonic realm. And then there's the third heaven where God dwells, right? And so when we read that psalm like Joy read earlier, who can ascend upon your holy hill? It's more than ascending onto a natural mountain, a physical mountain, like Mount Sinai, like Moses went up into the mountain. It's about going. I believe that Moses, maybe, I always have the right to change my opinion. And maybe you can agree with me on this. Did Moses leave this planet? Considering that he was gone for 40 days and was sustained, no food, no water. Did he enter into the very throne room of Yah? How do you get the blueprints like he did?
That's right.
Other than to see it. Now, he could have had a great download on the mountain, or he could have ascended into the very presence of God. I don't know. Think about it. Because a lot of times we like to spiritualize things to a point that, hey, we're just having an out-of-body experience. Or maybe he was having an off-the-planet experience. I don't know. Think about it. We don't know. I'd like to ask Moses, what happened that day? There was something that took place when Peter, James, and John, Peter, James, and John. Yeah, Peter, James, and John. They were on the mountain with Yeshua. And the cloud came down. Something supernatural took place. So much to the point that Peter said, hey, we need to build 3 sukkahs for you guys. 4 sukkahs or whatever. Like, no, Peter, you just messed it up. You totally messed up the situation. I know you just felt like you had to say something. But look at this. Paul gives a testimony. And how do I know that it was Paul, Rabbi Shaul? How do I know that he had this visitation? He had a life-changing experience? Well, let's read it. And it's over in 2 Corinthians chapter 2, beginning with verse 1. 2 Corinthians chapter 12, 2 Corinthians chapter 12, beginning with verse 1. Boasting is necessary, though it is not profitable, but I will go on to visions and revelations of Yahweh. I want to just preface this. If you go back to chapter 11, he talks about how there's all these other people that are coming in saying, that he's just saying, like, why are you listening? Why are you in that state that you're in a funk? You're focusing on men. You're focusing on who talks the best. Well, if somebody can boast, I can boast. But he's talking here, boasting is necessary, though it's not profitable. But I'll go on to visions and revelations of the Lord. I know a man in Messiah who 14 years ago, whether in the body, I do not know, or out of the body, I do not know, God knows, such a man was caught up to the third heaven. Okay? In Revelation chapter 4, we see that John is having this revelation of Yeshua. And how's he describing it? He's describing himself, hearing a voice that says, come up here. So he does, and he comes into and he describes the throne of Yeshua. Verse 3, and I know how such a man, whether in the body or apart from the body, I do not know, God knows, was caught up into paradise and heard inexpressible words which a man is not permitted to speak. On behalf of such a man I will boast, but on my own behalf I will not boast, except in regard to my weaknesses. For I do wish to boast, I will not be foolish, for I will be speaking the truth, but I refrain from this so that no one will credit me with more than he sees in me or hears from me. So in verse 6, he's actually telling him that this man is him. Because of the surpassing greatness of the revelations, in verse 7 it goes on and explains why it was him. Because of the surpassing greatness of the revelations, for this reason, to keep me from exalting myself, there was given me a thorn in the flesh, a messenger of Hasatan, to torment me, to keep me from exalting myself. Did you ever recognize, I always knew this was Paul, but it's right there. He says, I know of this man, I don't know if he's in the body or out of the body. He's talking in the third person, like Robert Dole. Do you remember Bob Dole, when he ran for president? He always talked about himself in the third person. Well, that's what Paul's talking about, himself in the third person. But in verse 7, where he says, because of these revelations, they were to keep me from exalting myself. So a powerful thing. The point is, he was taken to a place that was off the planet. But there was so tremendous of revelations, he was not even permitted to talk about it. Why would someone be allowed to be brought to such a place? Think about it. Has anybody here had such a revelation like that was so tremendous that you couldn't talk about it? Literally, you have no words. Yeah. I think that's what he's talking about. It's indescribable. But if you go on and you read in that, he was given this thorn in the flesh, and it talks about whenever he went into a city, they're beating him up. He got 39 lashes. And if you go on to that passage, I don't have my Bible open, but 39 lashes like 3 times. They say 40 lashes will kill you. So it's 40 minus 1. Yeshua got it once. He got it 3 times. I got to read that. Because for some reason, the back of my head is like maybe 5 times, so I don't want to get that wrong. But what I am saying is that the guy went through a lot. Where are we at? Second Corinthians chapter 12. Okay. See, I was trying to be efficient and print it off. So see what happens. Thorn in the flesh. Concerning this, I entreated the Lord 3 times that it might depart from me. But he said that my grace is sufficient for you. Do you realize that grace is not a free pass? Right. Like, that's what the church teaches. Grace is not a free pass, but it is the power to overcome. Let's just make that clear. Okay. All right, y'all can read that for yourself. Go back and look at that. But he took a lot upon him. And he had a lot to boast about in the natural, but also in regards to what happened. 5 times I received from the Jews 39 lashes. 5 times. That's verse 24. Verse 24, 5 times. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. A night and a day I have spent in the deep.
Which chapter? You didn't say what chapter.
Oh, I'm sorry, that's 2 Corinthians chapter 11. Yeah, go back a page there.
Okay.
Right? I have been on frequent journeys and dangers from rivers, dangers from robbers, dangers from my countrymen, dangers from the Gentiles, dangers in the city, dangers in the wilderness, dangers on the sea, danger among false brethren. I've been in labor and hardship, through many sleepless nights and hunger and thirst, often without food and cold and exposure. Apart from such external things, there is the daily pressure upon me of concern of all the churches, all the assemblies. Who is weak without my being weak? Who is led into sin without my intense concern? If I have to boast, I'll boast of what pertains to my weakness. I mean, these are the thorns in the flesh that he experienced. So why do you think that Yahweh would say, hey, come up here? Don't you think he was feeling such oppression? That it was such a powerful event that took place in his life, these things that are going on, that the Father is saying, hey, I'm going to let you see through in the third watch. I had nothing like that experience. I just heard his voice pierce through the darkness to lift that burden off of me, to let me know that he saw me, that he understood me, and that he doesn't make junk. Right? How many times we heard God doesn't make no junk?
That's right.
Doesn't make no junk. That's a double negative. All right? So, but when we understand that, then we understand there's something to contend for.
That's right.
Right? There's something that and I understand in some circles have taken this concept of, well, I just went into the third heaven and I went to the throne room and yeah, I saw you. You passed me on my way out. I think that's taken a little bit lightly, and I think there's false visions out there. I think there's counterfeits out there, and we just need to be careful about that because Hasatan knows these things. Hasatan's been in the throne room before. So don't you think that he can give us ideas and put those thoughts in our minds? If he can put thoughts in our mind that we're trash, that we are a failure or something, can he not put thoughts in our mind that we're in a place that we're really not? I mean, just think about that. We just need to put this into perspective. But in the time when there's pressure upon us that the Father wants to give us the genuine, yeah, he's going to take the enemy is going to try to counterfeit that. And if we're not, and especially if we got stuff going in our lives that the Father's trying to work on and purify out of our lives, but it's an open door for the enemy, why would the enemy not take advantage of that? If we get puffed up in knowledge, then the enemy can say, I can take that pride and there's an open door for me to work with. Okay? But why does why does the enemy want to do that? We talked about this before, because he wants to create a disillusionment in our lives. He wants to bring discouragement in the camp. He wants to do these things because he wants to impart his plan. We were praying for the children about that they would fulfill the purposes for which God has called them. But the enemy has a strategy and a blueprint for us. It just depends on what throne room we may be going into. Remember last time I was talking about this when we contend for the blessing, is that I was talking about John G. Lake. John G. Lake was a powerfully anointed man of God. That was the one who went to South Africa. There was plague. He said, put the plague in my hand. He take the foam out of that dead person's mouth and put it in my hand. Look at it in a microscope first. And they said, oh yeah, it's teeming. It's alive with plague. He said, put it in my hand. Foam, plague. Okay? Then he says, now, put it back under the microscope. And every cell of that plague was dead. Because of the anointing. Right. The power of God. I mean, we have this threat called coronavirus right now. We need to be smart. We need to be able to be prepared. We need to understand the dynamics of it all and that type of thing. But should we fear? No. But should we not enter into that place? If John G. Lake can have an anointing on him like that, can we?
Yep.
If God's not a respecter of persons, then I would say yes. But he had an encounter, an angelic vision, an angelic visitation is what he said. He didn't name the angel. He just said, but the angel gave him a word, and he said this. I'm just reminded, this is what we talked about last time. The angel opened up the scriptures to the book of Acts. Okay, so in the Hebrew roots, we spend a lot of time studying out the Torah. We know that these things that are in the Tanakh, they apply to us today, but a lot of times we spend so much time there, we forget about the actual things that took place in those Torah believers in the first century. And the book of Acts records what they did, and he says that the angel opened the scriptures to the book of Acts saying, this is the Pentecost of God. All right, Shavuot, right? The Pentecost of going to the mountain. Second chapter of Acts, they went to the mountain. It was a different mountain. It wasn't Mount Sinai. It was Mount Moriah. It was Zion. It was the Temple Mount. So this is the Pentecost of God, as God gave it through the heart of Yeshua. Strive for this, contend for this, teach the people to pray for this. Talking about the book of Acts. Do you pray for the book of Acts to be alive and active in your life? When Peter's shadow heals the sick?
Yes.
All I'm just saying, that's what the Bible says. They laid their lame, the sick along the road, knowing that Peter would pass by, that his very shadow. I mean, they were going down to the water of Bethesda, hoping that the angel that stirred up the water, someone would get in the water and get healed. Now they were trying to get into the shadow of Peter as he's walking. There's something about that. There's such an anointing that was just pouring off him. This is the Pentecost of God as God gave it through the heart of Yeshua. Strive for this, contend for this, teach the people to pray for this. For this and this alone will meet the necessity of the human heart, and this alone will have power to overcome the forces of darkness. Okay, let's read on. He goes on and records, as the angel departed, he admonished Brother Lake, saying, pray, pray, pray. Teach the people to pray. Prayer and prayer alone. Much prayer, persistent prayer, is the door of entrance to the heart of God. Now, who am I to say whether or not he had an angelic visitation? But I'm telling you, that message is God. I believe that was straight from the throne room of God. I think that was speaking directly to his heart. I want to ask you, I'm not going to ask for a raised hand, but do you pray like this? I'm going to tell you this. I don't pray like that. I need to pray like that. We all need to pray like that. But teach the people to pray. Prayer and prayer alone, much prayer, persistent prayer, is the entrance, is the door of the entrance to the heart of God. Now, there is a connection to this that we need that I think will show us how that door opens. And we know this because we've talked about this. This is in our Torah portions, but this is out of Ezekiel chapter 44, verses 15 and 16. It's about the Zadok priesthood. Okay? I mean, after all, do you want to go beyond that veil that sits between us and the throne room?
Yes.
I do. Ezekiel 44, verse 15, but the Levitical priests, the sons of Zadok, who kept the charge of my sanctuary, when the sons of Israel went astray from me, shall come near to me to minister to me, and they shall stand before me to offer me the fat and the blood, declares the Lord God. They shall enter my sanctuary, they shall come near to my table to minister to me and to keep my charge. Okay, Ezekiel's temple is not the first temple, it's not the second temple. In fact, at the destruction of the second temple, here, Ezekiel is getting a picture of the third temple. And I'm going to tell you this, I don't believe it's the third temple that the Jews want to build on Temple Mount. I don't believe it's the temple that the Christians are out there saying that they're looking to be built on Temple Mount. I believe that anything that's built on Temple Mount is probably going to be a counterfeit. It's my opinion. I think he's seeing something else. Because the Zadok priesthood, I believe, is related to the Melchizedek priesthood. The Melchizedek, Zadok priesthood is the sons of righteousness. Zadok comes from righteousness. The Melchizedek, the king of righteousness, we are the people of righteousness. Are we not?
Yes.
We're the ones that are clothed in his royal robes, in the robes of righteousness. The white robes, those are the priestly robes. So if we are to be those type of people, it says, but the Levitical priests, the sons of Zadok. So if you want to say this, the Zadok priesthood are come out of the Levitical priesthood. But they're different because they came from the line of Phineas, who took the spear and jabbed it through one of the princes of the tribes with that Midianite woman, or the Midianite woman. Yeah. A priesthood that stands up for righteousness. But going on, verse 23 and 24, moreover, they shall teach my people the difference between the holy and the profane, is a message that is more than food. I'm just going to tell you, if you understand clean and unclean, then all of a sudden everything else opens up between what is clean and unclean in this world that is not just food. Verse 24, in a dispute they shall take their stand to judge. They shall judge it according to my ordinances. They shall also keep my laws and my statutes in all my appointed feasts and sanctify my Sabbaths. This is where it's really important for if the Christian church could come around to this, they won't debate you any longer on whether or not you should have pepperoni on your pizza. To me, it's like, I'm not even going to argue that point. Okay? Right? Okay. This is the ministry that God, so understand, this is the ministry that God is providing to cleanse and purify his bride. Without it, we sang about the song of the beautiful bride. Not everybody's the bride.
True.
Some will make it, and some will be the guests, the wedding guests, and some will be the servants, but not everybody's going into that bridal chamber. So the primary purpose of these deluding spirits I was talking about is to veil the minds of those that are without faith. So think about this. 2 Corinthians 4:4 tells us this. Now remember, Paul, he's midrashing with the Corinthians. He's midrashing. What's that? He's discussing this from the Torah, from the perspective of the Torah. And people say, well, I don't see this in the Torah. Okay, it's there. In verse 4 of chapter 4, in whose case the God of this world has blinded the minds of the unbelieving, so that they might not see the light of the gospel of the glory of Messiah, who is the image of God. The whole purpose is to veil our minds. And yes, believers, we know that the Jews have a veil. They don't see Yeshua as Messiah, right? You would agree with me on that? But I'm going to tell you that even in this room, when we go through stuff, a lot of times we don't see Yeshua as our Messiah because circumstances are looming too big. If the King of Glory is victorious, a lot of times we don't allow him to come in victoriously in our life. That's, you know what I was praying during that time when that cloud was on me, that depression? Because I'm going to tell you, from that point, I've not felt it. But I was praying for that one word. Because I couldn't see Yeshua in the midst of that. I can walk through the mechanics of everything, but until I see Yeshua, I'm not experiencing the victory. But how do we know that word that we're hearing? How do we know that it's a pure word, that it's not coming from any other source? I mean, that's the next question, right? Because there's a lot of false prophetic words, like what I spoke about earlier in 1 John 4:1. As many false prophets have gone out into the world. And I want to tell you this, a false prophet doesn't have to have flesh and blood to speak through. Because that voice that you hear in your head, it can be the false prophetic voice that's trying to lead us astray. Okay? So how do we know? Back there in 1 John 4:1, where it says, do not believe every spirit, but test the spirit. So how do you test it? How do you test that deceptive voice to see if it's from God? Well, one, how many times do we know? We know this from Scripture, and it tells us that you believe that God is one. Well, good. Even the demons believe. It talks about that over in James, the book of James. Well, even the demons believe, right? Well, if the demons believe, see, a demon will come in. They'll announce the suffering of Messiah. Oh, he suffered and he died. But how many times in that message we see the oppression, failure? I mean, after all, how can the Lord of glory be defeated by a trial that's a mistrial? Because they put operatives on that jury to make sure that he would be convicted. And by the way, you know why? They said that he lied to Congress. I'm just going to throw this in. You know, they said he lied to Congress. They asked him to fill out a 500 questionnaire. 500 question questionnaire. 500 questions. All of these questions, in order to get on a perjury, where you just kind of put them there and you just go on, there's just thousands of emails. I have deleted about 15 emails because of junk mail. They just build up like, I can't. Why? Because it wasn't set up that way originally. So that door opened, it didn't record. I didn't know that someone coming in and stole my guitar. So he didn't state exactly what was in that email. That was correct. And so when they questioned him in Congress, he answered it the right way. And then they said that he lied. And then they want to throw him into jail for 9 to 10 years, 9 to 11 years, entrapment. Now, of course, now that this last week they came back with that and they said stiff of a penalty. You know, if any, they probably used to give him probation for a month. But they let Andrew McCabe off, the head of the FBI, who lied to the FBI. Testing the spirits. These spirits, they're going to tell you these things. They're stray, right? They talk more about the crucifixion rather than the resurrection. He suffered and died, but he conquered the grave. The grace that, you know, the stuff that allows us to slip by as opposed to the power to overcome, that's a false message. Okay? That's okay. Those are the things that keep the veiled eyes and don't understand that the type of messages that really remove us the very truth we need to work through. And when we're seeing more of that stuff as a part of the ability to overcome, then we're going to be under that deluding influence. So you're saying, I'm going to overcome this thing. Okay? Because zeal alone is not sufficient. We can just say, I'm going to do this, and we can psych ourselves up. And we can read every one of those overcoming. But you realize alone is not going to give us the victory that we're looking for. That the enemy knows that he can just he can say, go back and do this, and you're going to have the perfect equation for victory. And you quote all positive and all those positive scriptures, and I have nothing against things, but Romans 10:2 says, "For I testify about them, they have a zeal for God, but not in accordance with knowledge. For not knowing about God's righteousness and seeking to establish their own, they did not subject themselves to the right God." In other words, if we rely upon our own way of doing it, and that is witchcraft.
They do it all the time in the church. And the events.
But when the Father drops His word into our heart and we confess,
Right.
and maybe it's a particular verse that's made more than conquerors through Him who loved us, then guess what? That word sets us free.
Right.
There's a difference. I'm quoting positive scriptures in our positive prayer. But when we hear the voice of God, and we take that word and speak it in our circumstances, the enemy doesn't have a way to come that. And by the way, sincerity, there's not enough zeal and there's not enough sincerity. Not Uzziah, Uzzah. Uzzah, he was really sincere when he touched the ark, when the oxen stumbled. And what happened to him? He went, yeah, he did. He did. But there is something that we do follow, is we do follow God's protocol. And that's what I'm talking about here. Because those seducing spirits, they're to get us to do religious things. The religious things, the liturgical things are the very merit. By simply doing liturgy to find favor with God, that's the point. If liturgy is simply a way to connect with the heart of God, and that's a vehicle to use, then there's nothing wrong with that. Okay? There's a difference. The service of doing for God in order to seek His blessing, what He's doing. So the whole purpose is that we look at our circumstances, we look what's going on, and we say, Father, okay, you're working here. Show me so I can work with you. So when we come in here, for example, in the life of worship, we don't come in here because, and we want to come into alignment with what He's doing. That works. So when we have a time of praise and worship, and we're in praise and worship about praise and worship, one, it says that He's enthroned upon our praise. Every week. Why did I pray that? Not because I'm following a pattern, because I always do that, because I desire that. Yes. Right? But the whole purpose is that when we come unified, and His throne comes into this house, and in unity the anointing comes. Music and the song allows our voices to harmonize as one. A lot of times when you see for example, when there are worship services where they are praying together, they have like a lot of times in Messianic services, they'll do the traditional service where they'll have kind of a responsive reading, where the one who is the caller who will call it out, and then the people respond as one. That is a unifying factor. It unifies the people to come together, to have the same mindset, to declare their faith together as one. That music is, but we use water, not just doing our own thing during the time of worship, but we're actually coming together as one. Then we're actually, if we're doing our own thing, we're having side type of thing. I'm just telling you straight up, it hinders the anointing. We're not all in unity. We're able to come together, and we're say, "Well, I can't sing." It doesn't say that beautifully or in harmony, but it does say that we're to lift up our voices. You know, there was a lady when I was my parents had left Norway in the middle of my senior year. For the first 6 weeks that they were gone, I stayed one family out, so I got moved over to another family. But So this lady, I was like, why don't you ever sing? She goes, I can't sing. And then I heard her sing one day, and I'm like, she had no, what do they call it, an ear? She had a monotone way of singing, but I heard her singing. It was monotone, totally in a different pitch. It wasn't there. It wasn't happening. I'm like, now I know. But you know what she did? She did sign language, and she sang for the deaf. Isn't that awesome? She still gave an expression of worship. So I don't think it isn't an excuse to say I can't sing, so I won't sing. No, we're to lift up a joyful noise unto the Lord. It's still in that same unity, the Spirit, that the anointing flows. Now, Malachi 3:15 says this. And by the way, since I'm talking about this, I may have pointed those here. But in the false prophetic ministry, and you can say those voices that try to speak into our ear will attempt to persuade people that it's useless to serve God in radical pureness or to keep His word earnestly. It's the same thing. Those voices will say, your voice doesn't matter. Same thing in prophetic ministry. How many times does a father drop something into your heart, and it's for everybody in the congregation?
Yes.
And a voice will come speak to you, the false prophetic ministry, that says, your voice doesn't matter. That's not. There are ministries that the prophet is not for the modern of Messiah. Malachi 3:14 and 15. You have said it is vain to serve God, and what is it that we have His charge, and that we have walked in mourning before Yahweh of hosts. So now we call the rest. Not only are the doers of wickedness built up, but these people are doing bad stuff, and they're getting a pass. What does it matter? Why should I? See, deception is not from standing righteously before God and sharing His vision. Really, what's it all boiled down to? It comes down to this. Turn it on. Because I'm going to tell you this. These things where we want to hear God, if we're not hearing from God, we're hearing from else. And that is actually to prophesy. Yes. Well, and some people want to say, I just want to have that ministry where I just can speak into people's lives. And do you ever come across somebody like that? They're just eager. They're eager for it, but they have the wrong motivation. We've got to be careful about that as well. So, but that so much because your appetite to that actually go to the place. Whether we get to the throne room or not, we can go to that. We hear from God. And it may be in the third watch, by the way, where all we need is that nugget that's dropped in. I kept going, I just heard it. That just changed my life. And you might just go back to sleep. You know when I woke up that one day, that one morning I heard that, you was so concerned that I might forget it. I sat and repeated it and repeated it and repeated it and repeated it, because I know how sometimes that I know that I dreamed. I was very much aware of a dream that I was having, and a minute after I woke up, it was a dream. Yeah. Right? And I didn't want to lose it. I did not want to lose that one word. But here's the next thing. And this, do you realize that each one of us is crucial in our roles in the kingdom? If there's only one person's congregation that is going in and seeking the face of God, vulnerable is the congregation to come under attack. Why do I say that? Is because we need to function as spies in the kingdom. If we want to know, do you believe that we have the ability to actually go and spy on the enemy's camp and find out what the enemy is doing so that we can come back and say, guys, this is happening, and we need to pray for a blueprint, a plan, a strategy to combat what the enemy is doing and what he's about ready to bring upon us as a congregation, or maybe in a family that's maybe going through stuff right now. And we need to know what those strategies are so that we can lay down prayer cover in order to completely annihilate the enemy. I mean, I'm not talking about push back the enemy, annihilate the enemy. You know, I like going back and looking at the different stories in the history of World War II. World War fascinates me. The history of it all is just fascinating. But how was Rommel defeated in northern Africa? Well, that was part of it. That was part of the defeat. But also part of the defeat was that General Patton studied Rommel. He went and read his books. He read about his strategy, how he viewed war, the art of war. And he took those strategies and completely pushed the Nazis out of northern Africa. Yes, part of it was defeated because they didn't understand the difference between the clean and the unclean. Yeah. Because what did they do? What did the Nazis do? They had all of their cookings in their kitchen and all their food set out, but then they would go up over the sand dune to relieve themselves. Okay? Well, they didn't bury their stuff. So the flies would fly over and they would just partake in all of the non-food stuff, and then they would come over to the food stuff and land on it, and they got sick. So yeah, the flies did defeat them. But Patton, he did understand how the enemy operated.
Strategic.
And he pushed them out of North Africa. Yep. Then he pushed them out of Italy. And they pushed on up into Europe. And they destroyed the enemy. Patton could have stopped the North Koreans. But it was the powers that be that told Patton to back off. You know, so much to the point that they had to kill Patton, General Patton. They had to assassinate him. They sent him to Europe. And essentially they ran him off the road. He got injured, and ultimately he was on his way to recovery, but somehow he just often died. He was too much of a threat to the establishment. All right, let's go on. Okay, but what am I talking about? I'm talking about strategies. How do you know? Well, we have to be able to lay down prayer cover for those that are under attack, but we have to be able to go in and get this. Okay, so what am I talking about? First Kings, chapter 6, verses 11 and 12. Now the heart of the king of Aram was enraged over this thing. And he called his servants and said to them, "Will you tell me which of us is for the king of Israel?" In other words, who is the mole? Verse 12. One of his servants said, "No, my lord, O king, but Elisha, the prophet who is in Israel, tells the king of Israel the words that you speak in your bedroom." Do you understand why Paul may be midrashing about the gifts of the Spirit in 1 Corinthians chapter 14? When he says, I pray, he said, pray that you might have spiritual gifts.
Yes.
But especially to prophesy.
Yes.
Verse 14.
I wish that you all would prophesy.
Chapter 14, that's right. Pursue love and desire earnestly spiritual. And in a lot of Bibles in the print or in italics it says gifts. But especially that you may prophesy.
What was that first King's reference again?
That was 2 Kings.
Second Kings.
Yes. Did I say 1 Kings? I'm sorry.
Yeah,
All right. I apologize. Yeah, 2 Kings. I read it from the scripture. Okay, 2 Kings 6, 11 and 12. All right? 2 Kings. Why do we want to prophesy? Well, that's just not for me. Well, maybe it's so that we can lay down some prayer cover. Maybe because we need to know the strategies of what the enemy is doing. Maybe we need to be able to go in right there or to where the king of darkness is, and they're the powers, the principalities of this dark world, high places.
To build up the body. That's part of it.
It's also to build up the body. Yeah, it goes on. So they build up the body. Exactly. But we got to be careful to guard against those things for God to the point of unknowingly lose sensitivity to hearing his voice. Okay, what am I talking about? See, in order for us to mount a proper attack, to mobilize, we've got to be able to identify where the spies are in our own camp. Right? And that's why I'm saying we're not doing things for God, we're doing things with God.
Ask and you'll get it.
Right? And you say, well, why do we want to do that? Because if we're just doing things for God, then we're going to lose our sensitivity to his voice. And I would dare to say that's where most believers are today. They're trying to do things for God because it looks religious. It's a pattern that's been shown. Maybe it's been shown in their home. Maybe it was shown because they watched other believers. And it looks like, well, they're doing this, so I'm going to do this because I want to bless God. Well, then we start running into the attitude, I'm doing this for God. No, because we need to step back and say, okay, what is God doing? I'm just repeating that because it's really important. Understand that our highest purpose is to have a relationship with him. Remember, that's our highest purpose, is to be intimate with him. And a lot of times we enter that through a season of travail. Well, I'm going to tell you right now, with the things that are going on the earth today, we are going into a season of travail.
Yes, we are.
Right?
I'm already there.
Yeah. I mean, it might not be just the things that are going on in your own personal life, but think of it. Just look at what's going on in the earth.
Yeah.
The earth's crust is splitting open.
Yes. Come on, preacher.
Right? Russia, China, I think it was in Ecuador, in Africa, there's places the earth is just cracking open and there's like fire coming up, smoke, stuff. I mean, it's literally the magma of the earth is coming through. There's pressure it's building up in the core of the earth right now. That's why we're seeing all the volcanism. And that's not like being, okay, right? Okay? Live long and prosper. Okay, it is, there's gamma radiation coming from the core of the earth.
Yeah.
That's serious. Think about the threats that are in nature right now. Have you seen the huge die-offs in animals?
Yep.
Okay, we've been seeing that for years. It's like animals just dying off. What about threats of disease? We've talked about the coronavirus. Political upheaval. It's not just in America that we're seeing political upheaval. It's all over the world. Military buildup. Last year, we kept seeing in the news about these hypersonic missiles. Russia has, China has, that the U.S. says we have, we just never demonstrated it. Do you know where Russia got? I'm not going to go there. Okay. Stay on track. How about the cosmic bombardments? Like these coronal blasts from the sun? I mean, literally to the point that it completely collapses the electromagnetic field around the earth. But then we're getting cosmic radiation coming from the other direction. All that energy is going into the core of the earth and, of course, heating up. Earthquakes going on all around us. What about plant production? All-time low. Famine. Drought, flood, fires, right? The earth is going through a time of travail. Is the body of Messiah in the place of travail yet? Or are we just living today like we lived yesterday?
I think we're there.
Do we feel the pressure yet?
I do.
But until we feel the pressure, we won't be in travail. I'm going to tell you that's the way we are. Now, there are certain people that are in travail, that they are literally intercessors and they are prayer warriors. But that's not supposed to be for a select few. That's for all of us to be. When these things and these pressures are going on in the natural, and the earth is travailing, which just reminds me, just go over to Romans chapter 8.
Start where?
Verse 20. For the creation was subjected to futility, not of its own will, but because of him who subjected it in hope, that the creation itself also will be set free from its slavery to corruption into the freedom of the glory of the children of God. For we know that the whole creation groans and suffers the pains of childbirth together until now. And not only this, but also we ourselves having the fruits of the Spirit, even we ourselves groan within ourselves, waiting eagerly for our adoption as sons, the redemption of our body. For in hope we have been saved, but hope that is seen is not hope. For why does one also hope for? So think about this. Even creation is groaning. Creation is groaning now more than any other time, and Paul wrote that 2,000 years ago. How much more now? But every generation has to learn what that spirit of travail is. Because every generation has to, well, think about this. It was in the Torah portion. Not this week, but in last week's Torah portion. Every generation is going to face Amalek. Every generation has to learn how to travail on its own. What does Amalek look like in this generation? I don't know. Is it the Democrat Socialists? I don't know. You could say that. But could it be all the things that are coming upon the earth? That the Bible tells us that men's hearts will fail them for the things coming upon the earth. But because our body itself will travail if we don't. It's amazing how we are actually built to be in alignment with the things that are going on the earth. The very frequencies, we're actually in touch with frequencies in this earth that we don't even recognize. Those are some of those extra senses that have been taught out of us. We've been dumbed down. We don't understand. I was reading a testimony about this machine. It's a computer where this guy had complete kidney failure, and they hooked him up to this computer, and because dialysis wasn't working anymore, he had severe diabetes issues. They hooked him up to this computer that was running all of these frequencies that are known frequencies within the body. And in 2 sessions, his kidneys were working perfectly. And he went back to his doctors, and they could not explain it. That's just frequencies. These are people that are not believers and aren't praying over it. Just think about our prayers that are in frequency with the frequency of God. If you want to use it in those terms, his voice is a frequency. If our voice will align with his, we are in alignment of frequency. It's amazing how it works. It works all together. But see, this is where this type of confrontation, that we really have to come in confrontation with this dark world in order to establish, because essentially every day we are faced with the same thing that Elijah faced on Mount Carmel.
That's good.
With the prophets of Baal that are out there saying, we are in touch with the true God of the universe. And what do we do? A lot of times, well, maybe you are. And we don't travail. Now, the prophets of Baal, what did they do? They travailed. They cut themselves. They danced around. They worked themselves up into a frenzy. They got zeal. They were really, what do we talk about? They were really sincere, but they were missing it. And Elijah says, yeah, why don't you bring the sacrifice and a bunch of water, which they didn't have a lot of. And God came down, right? We know that's the short story of it all. But the issue is this, is that maybe we fear, maybe we're too busy, maybe we don't understand. Maybe we use these excuses to keep us from connecting. Maybe we don't hunger enough for the truth. I don't know. Everybody has their own story. We have our own lives. We're all living in different places. But if we genuinely want a connection with the living God,
That's right. Come on.
then we have to be a representative. We've got to be willing to go where we need to go. And I know those kids are ready. There were no man has gone before.
I'm ready.
All right, I'm going to leave you with this.
That was good.
All right. I'm just going to give you this because this just really caps it. This is 1 Kings. 1 Kings chapter 22, verses 1 through 28.
Would you repeat that again?
1 Kings chapter 22, verses 1 through 28.
Thank you.
And this is where the king of Israel went over to Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah, and he says, will you join me to go to battle at Ramoth Gilead?
Whoa.
And Jehoshaphat said, okay, I am, and my people your people, and my horses your horses, okay? We're in covenant together. But he says first, please inquire of the Lord. Please inquire of Yahweh. And so the king of Israel gathered, I'm going to go through it just real quick. King of Israel gathered prophets together, about 400 men, and asked the question, should we go to war? And they said, go up, the Lord will be with you. And Jehoshaphat says, is there not yet a prophet of Yahweh? Is there not a prophet of God in the house? So that's what he's saying. He said, well, there's this one guy, but every time he prophesies, I'm paraphrasing, he always speaks against me. I don't like it. So the king of Israel says, okay, bring up Micaiah, son of Imlah. Let's hear what he has to say. And so Zedekiah, the son of Kenah, said, we're going on. And the prophets were saying, okay, the Lord's going to give it this battle, he's going to give it to the hand of the king. And so Micaiah comes and says, behold, now the words of the prophets are uniformly favored to the king. Please let your word be like the word of one who speaks favorably. Verse 14, but Micaiah said, as Yahweh lives, what Yahweh says to me, I shall speak. And when he came to the king said to him, Micaiah, shall we go up to Ramoth Gilead to battle, or shall we refrain? And he answered him, go up and succeed, and Yahweh will give it into the hand of the king. And then the king said to him, how many times must I adjure you to speak to me nothing but the truth in the name of Yahweh? So he said, all right. What's he do? He's just flattering the king. All right, this is what they're saying, so I'm going to say it. He said, okay, I'm going to tell you the truth. You don't want to hear the truth. You can't handle the truth. So he said, I saw all Israel scattered on the mountains like sheep which have no shepherd. And Yahweh said, these have no master. Let each of them return to his house in peace. Then the king of Israel said to Jehoshaphat, did I not tell you that he would not prophesy good concerning me, but evil? Micaiah said, therefore hear the word of Yahweh. I saw Yahweh sitting on his throne, and all the hosts of heaven standing by him in his right hand and on his left. What was he doing? He saw Yahweh on the throne. He's bringing the word of the Lord down. Yahweh said, who will entice Ahab to go up and fall at Ramoth Gilead? And one said this, while another said that. Then a spirit came forward and stood before Yahweh and said, I will entice him. Yahweh said to him, how? And he said, I will go out and be a deceiving spirit in the mouth of his prophets. Then he said, you are to entice him, also prevail. Go and do so. Verse 23, and therefore, behold, Yahweh has put a deceiving spirit in the mouth of all these prophets, and Yahweh has proclaimed disaster against you. Then Zedekiah, son of Kenana, came near and struck Micaiah on the cheek and said, how did the spirit of Yahweh pass from me to speak to you? Micaiah said, behold, you shall see on that day when you enter an inner room to hide yourself. What did they do to Micaiah? Because he spoke the word of truth, they threw him in prison. So here's the point. When everybody's joining together in one voice, it sounds like, oh, it must be God. Maybe it's not. We got to understand that those voices that are speaking against us, how many times we want to hear what we want to hear, so that's what we're going to hear. But maybe we just need to hear the voice in the third watch, the fourth watch. And all of a sudden, it's going to set us free. Well, that's the breakthrough. That's the breakthrough. But what do we want? We want to know what the enemy's doing. They could have asked. He could have asked. He said, well, don't go to war this time. It's not time. And they could have gotten the strategy of God. But no, they were just too much in a hurry. How many times do we get in a hurry? We don't want to be in a hurry. But we don't want to miss God in the middle of it. Okay? So whose voice is it anyway? Whose voice are we listening to? Who do we want to hear from? So anyway, let's be dismissed. Father, we just thank you for this time that we've had together. Father, we thank you for your word. We thank you for what you're speaking to us. We thank you that, Father, you're encouraging us to press in, to pray, to travail, understanding that what's going on in the natural is a call for us to travail in the spirit. That, Father, that you begin to speak to our hearts and we would be that you would raise up within us. Father, I'm asking not for one or two, but that we would all be those who would travail. That we would all be those that would travail to hear your plans, to hear your strategies, to be the spies that go into the king's chamber of the enemy's camp, to find out the strategies so that we can thwart the enemy at every move. Father, there's so many things, so many implications for it, but we're living in a day and age where we have to make these things practical. Show us how to make these things practical so that we will have the strategies and know how to navigate through these waters. Father, we just bless you. We thank you for it. We thank you for your word of truth. In the name of Yeshua. Amen.
The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Shalom.